Hello everyone, this is Rick and welcome to Astralclub. This video is My Buried Gray Abductions. Before we get started real quick, if you're interested in becoming a supporter of this channel on Patreon, you get no commercials with advanced videos. There's an email where we can talk back and forth. There's priority on your comments and suggestions, and of course you get the advanced videos on Sunday rather than having to wait the full week. If interested, there'll be a link in the description. I have two new patrons I'd like to mention. Holger Schultz is an Astral Scout, and Vert is also an Astral Scout. Thank you very much. Next up, if you're interested in private lessons, you want to learn how to astral project, or you'd like to experience more astral projections, get more control over them, extend them, be able to travel in time, space, dimensions, you name it, I might be able to help you. If you're interested, there will be an email where you can ask for information in the description. In some ways, this video has been 5 decades or so in the making. Anyone following this channel has heard some of my basic, or some of my recent experiences rather, maybe they aren't basic, but some recent experiences with the gray aliens. It's dug up a lot that I thought was well buried because I hadn't had any dealings with them consciously since the 80s. But since the experiences that I've detailed in some of the recent videos, I've been having these dreams, and I wake up, maybe I'm perspiring, maybe I know there was something that happened. I'm trying to grasp what happened in the dream, and it felt so real. It felt like a memory or memories, and sometimes I can almost grasp them, and then they kind of fled. They ran away. Last night I was able to remember some of these dreams that I had last night, and they're very curious experiences, and I believe they're real, and I believe they've been unearthed because of my recent experiences with the Greys, and I'd like to share them with you. They do involve astral projection, so this isn't totally out of left field. I've always believed that in some cases astral projection can have something to do at times, not for everyone, but at times with experiences with aliens. And I'll mention that certainly as I go through these experiences. If this is something that triggers you in a severe way, then you are, believe me, excused from listening to this video. There's plenty of others on the site, close to 200 now, so you can skip this one. But otherwise, I think you might find this at least interesting. The memories start with my childhood. We had the literal 100-acre woods behind our house, and it was a place that we would often go to play in summertime and late spring when the weather was favorable. It was very familiar to we kids in the neighborhood, and back then, of course, I was part of the tail end of the baby boom, and every house on our block had at least a couple of kids. So on our one block, we probably had somewhere between 60 or 70 kids. There was a lot of kids running around. At any rate, our house faced the woods, and the woods always held a certain magical attraction for me, and I'm sure my siblings and the rest of the kids on the block. It was a place we could go and live out a variety of childhood fantasies. We'd build forts and sometimes raid other forts like we were pirates or or perhaps we would see things on television like the Vietnam War, and we would make believe like we were soldiers. Keep in mind, this is back in the old days with we boomers. I know that's very politically incorrect nowadays, but that's what we did back then. At any rate, it was also a place to explore nature. And it was one of the few places left in my smallish town that still had some raw nature available, that hadn't been developed. And I remember at certain times of the year, tens of thousands of birds would come from all around and nest in our little woods, because there was very few other nesting places where they could go. So this woods, though small, provided refuge to a lot of different types of creatures that otherwise would not have a home. So it represented something very, very magical, very special to us. And this is the site of some of my first experiences. As I recall, one night as a child, I would get out of my bed on this particular occasion, and for some reason I was compelled to look out my side window. And there, in the sliver that was available to my sight, I saw a silver craft. Not very large, rather smallish, I would imagine. Today, I would probably call it a scout craft. And it was just hovering over our woods. And I looked at it, and then I went back to bed. It would seem to be an odd reaction, but it made sense to me somehow at the time. My next memory was being awakened, and I was in my pajamas, as was my brother. And we decided to put on our shoes and go out into the woods to play. Keep in mind, it probably was sometime after midnight, and we were both young children. We were good kids, too. This would not be something that would ordinarily occur to us, but at the time, it seemed a perfectly normal thing to do. I recall sneaking downstairs. Now, my father worked at night, so he wasn't around. My mother was there, alone, and so she was asleep. I wasn't trying to hide something from her, but at the same time, we somehow knew to be quiet. It is as if we were in some sort of a daydream, now that I think about it. Some sort of an altered state, certainly. And we went outside, we walked out to the woods, and in a cleared area in the woods, there was a small craft, much like I had seen before, that had landed in the middle of that little clearing. And there was two smallish individuals there who were grays, just waiting on us. I wasn't alone. I was there with my brother, and there was a few other kids from the neighborhood. And we just filed into the craft. It was just, once again, like a dream. The next memory I had, I was naked on a, examination table. And I was now more conscious than I had been. I, of course, didn't like being naked. And I started feeling this animal fear. I was then aware that there were several beings standing next to me, one of which was looking into my eyes and trying to comfort me. It was at this point that I started using something that I had read in the book Dune. Dune by Frank Herbert was one of my favorite books when I was young. And I recall I had memorized the litany against fear, which was a technique in the book used as part of this religious sisterhood to dispel fear. Now, I have memorized it. My version is slightly different than the books, but it goes like this. Because, and I'm not reading it off of anything, I have this thing memorized because I've used it. And you may even want to memorize it. It may help you because it helps to deal with fear and dispel fear, especially the animal fear. And it goes like this. This is the litany against fear. I will not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will allow it to pass over and through me. And when it is gone, I will turn my inner eye to see its path. Where the fear was, there is nothing. Only I remain. And I would visualize this as I said these words. And I would say it over and over again until the fear was dispelled. And I recall the person who was trying to comfort me being surprised and a little puzzled because I call her she because she had a feminine energy to her. She said, this one is dispelling its fear. It no longer feels the fear that they usually do. They were referring to us in a different person as if we weren't really people, but just examination subjects. And then I recall clearly communicating to her telepathically, because I was used to doing that when I astral projected. I said, who are you and where do you come from? And at this she was very surprised because she then didn't address me but turned to her colleague who was doing the examination of me. This one's communicating. And this caused quite the consternation. It caused every bit as much surprise if a guinea pig that was being operated or dissected by a scientist or being prepared for that would suddenly start asking questions in English. That was the level of surprise. Now, I started feeling a little bit upset about being addressed to as if I wasn't in the room. So I just left my body. And at that point, I was standing next to her and she could see me. I also noticed that some of the others in the room, my fellow children, were projecting, but they were just hovering above their bodies up towards the ceiling. Some of them, I could tell, were unconscious. Others were just wrapped up in fear and really couldn't consciously think or react. And while I was standing there, I repeated my questions. And I asked, where do you come from? What is the purpose of this examination? And once again, she just looked at her colleague, and there was communication went back and forth, but it was so quick that I couldn't quite pick it up. Then the lead examiner, doctor scientist, said, we had better install a tracking node on this one. He may be of interest. And then that's when I saw them with a pair of essentially tweezers take, and it was like magnetized, take a little thing that's about the size of a BB that was used in BB guns, and there was these little wires sticking out of it. And with that, he took it and shoved it up my nostril pretty far. And the pain of that brought me back into my body again. I have no other memories after that. I remember that morning we woke up and both of us had bled onto our pillows, bloody noses. It's not uncommon for young children to have bloody noses. There are numerous causes that are quite normal. However, we seem to suffer from them as children more than I think the average kids did. And my brother eventually had to have his nose cauterized, yes, because he had been subjected to frequent nosebleeds, and they were quite bad. So they actually took him to the emergency room, and it had to be addressed. That night was, though, a little unusual because I remember the next morning we got yelled at by our mother because there were muddy footprints in our bedroom and they had been tracked up the stairs. And this upset her, and she wondered what happened. We should clean our shoes. No more questions were asked than that. We just got yelled at, and that was the end of that. I recall as a child, and this may lead, my wife observed recently, it may have led to some of my insomnia episodes. I tended to be very alert at night. I attribute it to my father not being around, and in essence, I was the lead male of the house while he was away. So I always seemed to be a bit conscious, even when I was sleeping, and that certainly assisted my astral projections because I was able to maintain this awareness even when I'm asleep. And to this day, I can wake up at any point during the night and tell you within 10 minutes what time it is. So I still have some sort of awareness level that is maintaining vigilance from those times. Other similar situations, my brother woke up once screaming at night, saying that he had seen a small devil in the closet. Of course, when we all woke up and my mother came to look, there was nothing there. Another very interesting experience. I recall this time my father was home. Now, my mother didn't drive, so my father had to be home, and I recall him being home. So it must have been some night where he wasn't working. There was this park that we would sometimes visit. It was a popular place to visit for people in my town, but only in the daytime. You didn't go there at night. Now, years later, it would end up being a refuge for people taking drugs and other unsavory activities. So they eventually introduced gates and would lock the gates and the entrances and the exits after a certain time. But back then, they were open. You could theoretically go through that park whenever you wanted. I recall being awakened by my father and my mother and told to get dressed, that we were going for a ride. Now this was late at night, probably sometime after midnight, and this is highly unusual to say the least. This was not something that would typically affect our middle class existence. We existed pretty much like everybody else did. My family was very average from that standpoint. So this was highly unusual, but it didn't seem unusual at the time. And he said we were going for a ride. So we got up without questions, got dressed, and we all piled into the Ford station wagon. We then drove to the park, which was about 15 minutes away from our house. We entered the park, and unsurprisingly, at this time, there was no one around. We drove to somewhere around the center of the park. And then the next thing I remembered was we saw a group of deer along the side of the road. My dad stopped the car and we all looked at the deer. And the deer's eyes were so big and so black that it was like you were getting lost in their eyes. And it was just endlessly fascinating to us. Although keep in mind, I'd seen many deer before, but for some reason, it was very interesting to us. The next thing I recall was we were driving home. When we got home, I noticed that it was sometime after 3 a.m. We had spent hours in that park, but all I recall is staring at some deer and then my dad driving us home. And when we got home, Without a word, we all left the car, got undressed, and went to bed. I forgot both of these experiences. And now that they have surfaced, I have two sensations. One from that time where none of that seemed remarkable. It seemed like we were under some sort of hypnosis where we're doing something that is odd, to say the least, but it seems normal. And now I have my current consciousness where I can look at it from my present position and say, that was weird, that was odd. As far as astral projection was concerned, as I noted, it was related in some way to the examination process. And I've mentioned that before too. But now that this memory has come back, I wanted to note that again. Certainly, as I said, I saw the other kids had their astral bodies out of their bodies. But they weren't able to manipulate it like I was for several reasons, because they were probably inexperienced in projection, where I was very experienced. And I was able to control my fear using that litany against fear, whereas they were trapped in this animal fear experience. With all my knowledge of the Greys today, I don't believe that they're classically evil. I believe that they don't share the same emotional levels that we humans do. As such, they don't easily understand, can't easily sympathize with what they are putting humans through. They don't have these same sensations. They can't empathize. So it's not like they're meaning to hurt. And I believe that they don't believe truly that they are. That what they are doing, they see as fairly harmless. And that in some way it is advancing their cause without undue damage to us. Now, I think their lack of understanding of our emotions and our psychology is flawed. And perhaps they have learned over the years that they are indeed causing some negative situations, to say the least. At any rate, I thought that these unearthed experiences would be of interest to you. Once again, I don't believe in allowing fear to control us. As I said, I'm a big fan of that litany against fear. If you ever feel fear, especially animal type fear, try using it over and over again while you're visualizing the fear leaving you. It works. It's worked for me over the years. So if you take anything away from this, take that away. A way to help you to dispel your illogical animal fear. Well, I want to thank you for listening to that video. If you found it interesting in any way, please hit the like button. Love those good old thumbs up. Please feel free to share it with those who you think might be interested. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to ring that bell, you'll get notifications of new videos. Of course, they are placed every week, Wednesday at 2 o'clock and Saturday at 8:15 in the morning, Eastern Time, United States. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.